Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar with IBM. I'm Courtney Octor from Integro, and on with me is Jim Skidmore from Integro. He's the Vice President of the Solutions Group. And we also have Bob Kalka from IBM, who handles security, and he is a wonderful speaker. So we are excited to have him join us. And we're going to be talking about tracking every identity everywhere it goes in hybrid environments, even in public and private clouds. So I'm going to let Bob and Jim take it away. If you have any questions, please be sure to pop them in the chat or in the Q&A section. We'll be looking at both. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for sharing your lunchtime if you're in the East, or good morning if you're in the West. We're grateful for your attendance. I'm Jim Skidmore. As Courtney said, I've been involved in the IBM ecosystem in security since 2001. Bob, even longer than me. We've been through a whole bunch of metamorphosis with regard to kind of identity and access. And as many people that have been around a long time may know, IBM kind of started this whole thing and has spent literally hundreds of millions of dollars over the time creating industry-leading principles, concepts, compliance, automation concepts, and other things. We started out with, kind of standard provisioning, deprovisioning capabilities. We then went through a time when we were doing request-based provisioning, which, as we all know, is probably not the safest way to do this. If you've been aware of that in the last few years, you may have seen some scenarios where some source code wound up out in the wild. If you know other competitors in the space, you know that one or two of them even grew out of IBM. So really, the intellectual property that we have has come a long, long way and has, really metamorphosized into the industry-leading solution stack that it is today. We will be talking a little about Verify. We'll be talking a little about governance. We will also be talking about VIP, which, if you're not familiar with IBM's capability to do detect and respond, you will find out more about that today, as well as posture management. So we're going to be able to track user identities. We're going to show you how to manage your user base more effectively and stay as resilient from an identity perspective as you can possibly be. So with that, I will hereby pass the reins over to Bob. Thanks, Bob.
Excellent, Jim, and thanks. Great to see everybody on here. So indeed, Bob Kalka, Global Lead for IBM Security. I am somehow in my 31st year of helping to build IBM's security business. Started in 1994 in Kerberos, went to directories, and then was behind IBM's first cybersecurity acquisition in 1999 of what we all called Web Single Sign-On at the time, and now everybody calls it Web Access Management or something of the sort. And so you might have heard that we just completed a little $6.3 billion acquisition of HashiCorp last week. And since roughly half of their revenues were around security, we consider that to be a partial cybersecurity acquisition. And Hashi is our 32nd acquisition since 1999. So we started in identity and we continue to invest in identity across the board. I'll touch on Hashi a little bit today, but what the main topic today is, it says identity visibility into hybrid IAM. Really what we're going to talk about is identity observability, right? Beyond just visibility into context, and that's where I think you go from visibility to observability. I am amazed because, I've literally spent 30 years flying around the globe meeting with clients every day. I've already had 3 client calls this morning directly. And this topic is fascinating because identity and access management is the kind of topic that, because it's complex and there's a lot of moving parts in most organizations around it, despite our attempts to make it simple, what happens is it's a market that gets a ton of attention as people sort of almost panic in terms of the holes they know they have. And then we get comfortable that we've got our act together enough, and you spent 3 to 5 years there, and all of a sudden you go, wait a minute, I've got other problems. And we are definitely on the upswing. The Gartner Identity Management Summit had the largest attendance, over 2,000 people they've ever had before. It was dramatic, and the issues that came up were all top of mind. The statistics show that this space of identity and access management, and identity observability in particular, are top of mind for some very, very, very clear reasons, which I'll show you in a moment. So I'm going to show you some stuff and then have Jim jump in as well. But every stat we're seeing these days points out that in the world of cyber criminals and in the world of cyber attacks, identities are the center point. Identities are, so here's an example. So 71% year-on-year increase in attacks that used compromised credentials. Then we've got 60% of all attacks identity-based, and that's the most conservative number we've seen. We've seen all the way up to 80 to 85% of attacks are identity-based, with using compromised credentials being the biggest thing, biggest source. And then 84% of organizations have faced identity-related breaches. So every number you see around this is a large number because it's become the predominant thing. And what that implies is that the best practice that people have been using, when they're even using the best practice for protecting against identity attacks, isn't working. Now, what is that technique? All of us that have done anything in a SOC know well what that answer is. The typical way we handle identity attacks is by turning on a user behavior analytics module in our security information event management SIM tool in the SOC, right? Regardless of what SIM tool you're using, you turn on some kind of user behavior analytics, and that's what we do to detect identity attacks. It's clearly not working well. Look at these numbers. Secondly, the reason it's not working well is that the way those tools work is they take in that glut of information coming in the SIM and try to deduce identity activity that doesn't make sense. That has led the industry about 3 years ago, really, to say, look, we've got to do this differently. Why are we not looking for identity attacks closer to the identity engines themselves? And why are we not looking for sloppy deployment of identities in the policy around identities, which now everybody calls posture management? Why are we not finding this stuff proactively so we can lock down the holes before someone comes and takes advantage of them? That's really what's behind this whole discussion today, is that when the industry, once again, about 3 years ago said, we need to do something different here. And that's what we're going to talk about, because what we're doing with Integro is something which is being seen as best in class here. So identity observability is the big deal. So let me give you one layer down of what that reality looks like. You've heard folks like Gartner talk about the identity fabric, and the identity observability is a critical component, just one, but a critical component of the identity fabric. And let's just be very clear what that term is. The identity fabric says most vendors, most shops that we work with will say, well, look, I have my strategic identity and access management tool, and I expect everybody to come use that thing. And if they don't, then, we'll just put political pressure on them, all this other stuff. The identity fabric says, number one, no single tool fits all the use cases that an organization has. As a result, most people have multiple IDPs, if not lots of IDPs. Secondly, not only is a single IDP not the answer, but asserting that the answer to the identity protection question is just putting in a different engine makes no sense. Because as we all know, once you have an identity and access management engine in place, doing a wholesale replacement is something that nobody wants to do, because you have a lot of customization. It takes a lot of time, effort, customization, all that other stuff. So all the identity fabric concept is instead of replacing technologies, is how do we put in gluing technologies that allow all the identity sources and user directories and growing non-human identities to be managed in a consistent way. That's all the fabric is. It says take a hybrid realism approach to this problem rather than some fantasy about the perfect technology to fix it. So what I find most interesting, because IAM is such a charged space, is that typically when I go in and talk to enterprise IT today, we always, of course, start talking about two types of identities, that being workforce, employees and stuff, partners, and then the consumers, SIAM, right? And that's the discussion we end up having. Now, point number one that's so fascinating is that the even larger identity problem that's emerging right now is the fact that generally a lot of shops will have 10 non-human identities for every human identity. And yet when we talk to enterprise IT teams is that they're often not even focused on the non-human identities because that's often being managed by the platform engineering team and the DevOps, right? All the cool kids doing that stuff, where they're baking in secrets into their applications and where they're doing non-human identity management. And there's been nothing that we can use in the industry to focus on human versus non-human identities. And when you even see some cross-referencing that shouldn't be happening. So we're going to talk today about not only workforce consumers, but we're going to talk about non-human identities as well. But most of the time when I talk to the enterprise IT team, we're only talking about workforce and consumers. Although Gartner did tell everybody, start paying attention to those non-human identities. And when I ask the typical client that I meet on and say, what is your strategy for this? They give me the name of a tool. They say, well, we've just standardized on Octus, Ping, SailPoint, ForgeRock, Entra, Verify, whatever happens to be. And we standardize on a directory, oftentimes Active Directory, right? And that one's interesting because I just met with a client a very, very short time ago that said, yeah, I've standardized an Active Directory for my user directories, for my human identities, but I just did an operational review and I have a team managing Active Directory on-prem. I've got a second team managing it in Azure and a third team managing it in AWS in the Forest. Okay. He said, so I have a single technology, but I actually have a hybrid environment. This whole picture, of course, is that a tool is not the solution because you probably have at least one workforce identity system. A lot of clients I work with have a homegrown system that they wrote 20 to 25 years ago that they've been trying to get rid of for 15 to 20 years, and yet it's still there, being used 80% as much as it was 20 years ago. And then there'll be an on-prem system that was put in 12 to 15 years ago that was supposed to replace the one. And then we have, of course, the new cloud-based SaaS one that is going to solve all the problems. And of course, it doesn't because we have multiple identities, multiple identity providers. And then you get to the legacy apps that often don't even support MFA, where you either have a homegrown system or you have a side file in the application with user IDs and passwords, and nobody wants to open that up because the people who wrote it probably aren't even around anymore. And that's before we get to hybrid cloud. So you realize the core problem that we're talking about today of needing identity observability is because these red dots show a simplified view of all the different places that identities are being managed today. And that's before we even get to the non-human identities. So what's happened is people have realized that if my number one threat vector is the identities, no wonder I'm managing policy in all of these different places with typically uncoordinated teams. Now, the fact that it's messy is inconvenient and stuff, but here's the real problem. The real problem is that there's certain things that everybody wants to do today that they can't because of this. For example, frictionless access, right? The way most of us are growing our business through modernized apps that get a better online experience. And the goal is to minimize friction, right? Go to passwordless, eliminate passwords, do FIDO2 passkeys, right? We do that at IBM. We manage 30.5 million identities with our Verify platform here at IBM. We eat our own dog food. And last year we turned on the FIDO2 passkeys, and now everybody uses it because it's a far better user experience and it's far more secure, right? So everybody wants to do friction, but here's your rhetorical question. How do you implement FIDO2 passkeys across all of these places? You can't. It's rhetorical. But this one is the big one that we're going to focus on today in terms of observability. And that is, how do you do threat management? How do you improve from 80% of the attacks, 60% of the attacks, whatever you want to call it, being on identities? How do you find when a compromised credential is being used by someone far quicker than the average today? This is a stat that came out in our cost of data breach study last year, which is insane. The average time to identify and contain a cyber attack today, and this is based on a huge sample of clients, the average amount of time to identify and contain a cyber attack today is 242 days. The worst case is if it's an identity stolen credential attack. In that case, it's 292 days on average to identify and contain that attack. That's proof that what we're doing for identity threat management is not working. So what if we could find out at the time of authentication that that's happening, right? So that's what we're talking about with identity observability. Not only what is happening in the environment, what is set up, but what is happening right now. So that threat management one, we're going to spend most of our time on here. There's other use cases like, do you have a single point of view of who has access to your systems? Most people don't. And then finally, there's a almost humorous, in a sick sort of way, issue we're seeing with cyber insurance providers, that they've all figured out that everybody is doing PAM, privileged access management, poorly. And that's before you start paying attention to the non-human identities. So what we've seen is the whole concept of the identity fabric is, how do you address those use cases? How do you allow an organization that has probably, as one client recently called it, a rat's nest of IAM technologies, to actually do those things with a big emphasis on threat management? So the way that we do that, because we started 3 years ago investing in this and become the industry leader in it, is that there are 7 different elements of delivering an identity fabric. First is you need to have identity orchestration, and we've done that in a way that it's vendor neutral. If you have our platform, love it. If you have Octoping, SailPoint, Entra, whatever, it works with any of those. Being able to put in orchestrated workflows across hybrid systems for identities. Second is risk-based analysis, and or risk-based authentication is what most people call it. That's the ability to do behavioral analysis during authentication and authorization, so you can detect things like leveraging a stolen valid credential. Third is the ability to shim into in a low-code, no-code way into legacy apps to add MFA and frictionless authentication to those. Fourth is where we're going to spend the rest of our time today. The 2 cool kid acronyms for identity observability is ITDR, Identity Threat Detection and Response, and Identity Security Posture Management, or ISPM. And I'll explain what those 2 things mean in a second. You, of course, have to be able to have a consolidated view of users through directory sync. You need what the cool kids call today, we called it in the old days, user provisioning and deprovisioning and centralized management. All the cool kids today call it joiner, mover, leaver. And then finally, of course, PAM. So what we're going to do from here is focus on the observability side, which is number 4, which is ITDR and ISPM. What we find very interesting is that ITDR and ISPM are where most people are starting on their identity modernization projects right now. When we see how organizations are rolling out the identity fabric concept, once again, adding the glue to get the rat's nest to be able to collaborate, is they either start by inspecting the posture. And what do I mean by that? So almost every organization that we're working with today that we've come in with this technology, we have found that there are numerous shadow directories that people are using to authenticate against that you had no idea were there. A department set up a directory, it kind of grew, and it's very regimented on just a certain set of resources or services, but it's still there, and people are still using it, and yet we in IT have no idea that it even existed. There's shadow identity silos, shadow identities, shadow directories, shadow assets, and shadow usage of SaaS apps. So being able to determine that in real time has been impossible, frankly, until about a year or 2 ago. And we're going to drill on that a bit. Then people want to connect their silos, but that's not where people start, because that's the hardest stuff. Where they're starting is either inspecting or actually protecting against the attacks, and that's the ITDR side of things. Okay, so let's dive down on that. So one of our technology partners that has given us the ability to do this has a great saying: hackers don't break in, now they log in. Right, and that's the point, is that compromised valid credentials is the most common attack form. And that's where these two acronyms, identity security posture management, identity threat detection and response, have become so big. Basically what they do is a constant flow, never stopping looking for a combination of identity blind spots like the shadow assets and then risky activities. Risky activities could be, for example, traditionally an attempted brute force attack on your identity engine, one of your identity engines, or a CRUD stuffing attack or something like that. But risky activities also include misconfigured devices. Risky activities include, here's a scenario we're seeing all the time right now. You have a user authenticating against a directory, accessing an application that by your policy requires MFA to get into. Okay. What happens when you actually are examining what's going on your network and with your cloud flows? And you find out that, first of all, that user is authenticating this directory you didn't even know existed. But then they're accessing the application and there's no traffic against the MFA engine. That means you got an MFA bypass. Can you detect that? Can you detect a VPN bypass? Can you detect a ZTNA bypass? That's what I mean by risky activities. So the blind spots is what people are calling ISPM, identity security posture management. The actual risky activities are the identity threat detection and response. Because if you think about it, what a SOC does, right, is TDR, threat detection and response. The ITDR is doing identity threat detection response, close, joined at the hip with your identity engines. So it finds it at its outset, not hoping you find it down the road in some UBA module. Now, let's be honest with each other. ITDR has gotten so hot that you know how this works. I mean, I've worked for a vendor for 30 plus years. You know, when we vendors hear that there's a topic that you're all excited about, all of a sudden overnight, all of us do that, right? And ITDR is in that space right now. So everybody claims to do ITDR today. So I'm going to show you how what we're doing is different than the generic definition that vendors are using today. But what we also uniquely provide is the ability to do that posture management side of finding the identity blind spots, because what we're finding is that that's where the greatest utility is today, is actually finding the things that can be taken advantage to execute an identity focused attack. So what we've done is we've come out with an engine that we call Verify Identity Protection, which literally is an AI model which delivers both secure identity posture management as well as the ITDR. So what is that? The way we do that, we partner with an awesome startup that IBM Ventures has poured a bunch of money into called Authmind. We evaluated about 30 companies that claimed to do ITDR about a year and a half ago. Now the number is much higher. And the reason we chose to invest in and partner with these guys is that they're the only ones who truly did ITDR and ISPM. And the way they do it is this picture. It is an AI model which has been being trained for 4.5 years now that takes all of your network flows, all of your cloud flows, and all your identity events. Just think about an AI engine which has been tuned to look for what are the norms in network flows, cloud flows, and all your identity events. So when I just gave you that example of, say, someone's authenticating against a directory you didn't know existed, and then accessing an MFA fronted app without going through MFA, the way you find that is through this, is that we're pulling in all the flows and all the identity activity, looking at them. We've got 4.5 years of experience showing what normalcy looks like. And then we find for you in real time the problems that are out there. That's why we call this identity observability, because that's exactly what it's doing. Now, the way we do this is in a way, once again, product's called Verify Identity Protection, or VIP. Sorry, it's kind of cool, but whatever. But what you're seeing here is a screenshot of the dashboard. And the dashboard is amazingly simple to use. What it shows you is across those different types of both posture problems as well as identity threats in real time, it shows them to you in real time. And when you click down on any one of those pieces, it shows you exactly why it flagged it. And it shows you the history, because we've got all the flows and we've been collecting them. So we could show you the history of when this became a real problem. So it's absolutely amazing. Now, there's about 150 different things that it looks for, but let's talk about what are the ones that almost everybody uses this for, because the technology now has been out for a couple of years, and we just released a major release of it about 8 months ago. So these are the three categories of identity observability that it finds that people find value in on day one. And I mean that on day one, because as soon as you hook this thing up to your flow sensors and to your identity engines, you're going to find things. So first is the identity blind spots. So shadow access. This one is very, very common, amazingly more common than you might think. Is that you might have someone with a machine using a corporate identity to access something. And what happens if they log out of that and use a local account on the machine to access resources? Can you detect that that's happening? So use of local accounts is like this hidden little thing that's happening a lot. Shadow assets, people authenticating against stuff you didn't even know were there. Shadow identity systems, shadow password managers. You might have a policy that says this is what we use, and then you find that there's 7 other password managers being used by various parts of the organization. We find that because what happens is when someone has a flow and it goes out to the password manager, we're going to see it and we're going to say, hey, did you realize that that's being used? In most cases, you weren't. And then shadow SaaS usage as well. You may say, well, here's all the SaaS apps that are, we officially support. And then all of a sudden you find out there's another dozen that you didn't know about. Because once again, it's just looking at the cloud flows and the network flows. So it just shows it to you innocently. That's the first one, is the blind spots, and that's your posture management. Secondly is infrastructure issues like credential hygiene. You'll see all of a sudden someone is got over entitled suddenly. Wouldn't it be good to know that as that's happening? Service account security. This gets at a really interesting topic. I've been playing a little bit right between human and non-human identities in this conversation. One of the things that people have not been looking for, but now you can because this does it for you, is let's say you've got a service account, right? That technically is a non-human identity, but you've got 7 different humans using that non-human identity to get access to a server, say through the service account. Can you detect that, right? Well, with this capability to see what's going on, we show it to you. So you'll have human users using non-human identities and non-human identities somehow leveraging the human user. We can catch that literally as it's happening. All right. And then suspected attacks like brute force and stuff. That's the second category that everybody uses this AI engine for. And the third is for the risky activity. And these are the bypasses, right? And I've already explained that a couple of times, right? So bypass of MFA, ZTNA, VPN, even bypass of PAM tools. We can detect that. And suspicious activity. Because once again, it's an AI model that looks at regular behavior. When it sees something that kind of matches previous risky behavior, it'll let you know about that. So all of this stuff, this is just a small subset of what it finds, but this is the stuff that people use this technology for the most. Once again, the way it happens is you hook it into, there's lots of ways to hook it into your systems too. For example, if you're using a SIM that you are collecting almost everything out there, then we can just hook into that and grab the flows from that. Instead, you can get in and hook into any of your network devices and grab the information that way. And then, of course, you hook into your identity systems. It collects that data. It looks at what's happening. It sends it into the deep learning AI model. And then something that's very unique for us as well with VIP is that I've noticed a lot of vendors are starting to backtrack their claims of doing ITDR. And they'll tell you they do ITDP, which is identity threat detection and protection. And notice what changes is the R to a P. So there's no response. They may find some identity focused things, but then they leave it to you to do something about it. What VIP delivers is the ability to do response as well. And you can do that in one of two ways. Either we have the ability within VIP to define steps of when you see this particular problem trigger, then go do the following steps, essentially a form of run book, or it will call out to existing SOAR tools, right? Security orchestration, automated response like QRadar or SOAR, and it will kick off run books from your existing SOAR tooling to do it. So it truly does ITDR, not just ITDP, like most of the solutions on the market right now are doing. And as I shared with you, lots of places you can hook into flow sensors, you can hook into a SIM, either cloud-based or on-prem, and there's several other places to connect this. And so that explains kind of how you hook this stuff up together. So there are so many cases of how this identity observability, ISPM and ITDR, can help. So for example, with the infamous Change Healthcare breach, right? If you look at how the initial access took place, how it was expanded, how it was moved laterally, and then how the exfiltration took place and stuff, you'll notice at the bottom here, we've documented these are all the things we could have done to stop it in its tracks. Now, this is one of the things that's so interesting about this, is that stopping something in its tracks as it starts is a heck of a lot better than taking 292 days on average to identify and contain one of these attacks, right? I mean, it's kind of stating the obvious. So what VIP gives you is that observability of what's happening for real, not what do I think's happening. So the ability to detect unexpected access and unauthorized use of remote access solutions, the ability to detect weak credentials, right? Looking at over credentialing or under credentialing, being able to detect all of a sudden that there's some new cloud file shares, right? We're pulling all the cloud flows. So as soon as a new cloud file it starts being used, we detect it and show it to you on that dashboard. And then of course, around various hosts and stuff. So that's what identity observability gives you. And this is why this space is so hot, because it's literally like the umbrella over identity management that gives us the visibility that nobody's had. So that's what we do with VIP. And Integro is one of our top partners for working with us on this stuff, because it literally gives you the observability that just hasn't existed. It gives it to you in a real-time way, and it allows you to actually do something about it as well. So one of the things that we in Integro want to offer you all is that we offer a no-charge posture assessment for identities, where we bring in the tool, and just with you, we sit down and spend an hour or two and show you, because within an hour or two, you're going to start seeing things. It's never occurred that it didn't start showing you stuff. And so it gives you the ability to start seeing that observability and also get comfortable with how simple the GUI is on this thing. And so we have an open offer to everybody on here that we'd be happy to come in and show you this in action. So this is kind of, one of the newest assets we have, because IBM is a hybrid cloud and AI company. Right? That's what we do for a living. And so this is a perfect example of hybrid, of dealing with the fact that everybody's got hybrid and the AI can help turn things around. This is an AI engine tuned to identities and identity threats and posture in particular that works across any set of IDPs and directories and gives you that observability that, frankly, there's no good reason to not be looking at that stuff. And this shows you that, once again, I'm in my 31st year of cybersecurity here at IBM. And we continue to literally bring out innovative technologies. And there's even more. We're just not here to talk about those other ones today. And now with our acquisition of HashiCorp, we now are going to be able to pull together the human, non-human identities, because of course, HashiCorp Vault is the gorilla of the market for secrets management, for non-human identities, for the platform engineering DevOps teams. And so you're going to see us doing stuff. We've already got single sign-on between it and stuff, but you're going to see some stuff that we're going to be able to do over the next 3 to 12 months that'll change how this stuff works. So we're really excited about that, needless to say. So let me turn it over to Jim, because I keep saying Integro is one of our top partners for this. So let's talk about why, Jim.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Bob. I think everybody, hopefully, just to kind of wrap that up, saw the vast differences. And once we show you kind of the user activity and where identities are going and how we're tracking and can enforce 2FA, we can do any number of things automated. I think you'll realize why this is completely different. As Bob said, also, we're really excited about the Hashi capability too, because once Vault, storing all those secrets, is natively integrated with Verify in the IBM security stack, it's not even close to the best entry in the market, is it? No one else will have this level of automation. I'm allowed to say that. I don't have IBM lawyers, but anyway, yeah. So a little about us. We're a global systems integrator. We've been working in this space for a very long time. As I mentioned, I've been in it since 2001. So we focus on security, compliance, and risk management and digital transformation. So anything to do with UI, applications, cloud, native, legacy, applications of all types, containerized, components and stuff like that. So needless to say, DevOps and DevSecOps are mission critical to us. So the identity part and the application part for us walk hand in hand. We do have a lot of experience along these lines, about 2 decades, and have been, winning some awards in the last few years, which we're proud of as a delivery partner. We do have sites around the world, from India, Europe, Australia, US, and work on client sites all over. And really we're really well known for being ranked as most competent for best value service provider. So those are for us, kind of the X and Y axis of client feedback that we get. Yeah, you can probably spin to the next one if you would be so kind. Okay, as Bob mentioned, there are things that we sort of already did. So we do SIM, SOAR, infrastructure readiness, where we actually help you to understand ramifications, create topology, garner a roadmap on preliminary, usually remote discussions to kind of help people start the planning process, even if they're not quite in budget cycle or something like that, so that they can understand ramifications and I think take into account a lot of planning around automation and automating processes, automating compliance reporting, figuring out how they'll, for compliance, for example, take the log events and aggregate those so that they can feed the auditor sort of in near real time without having to spend extra money or spend lots of time creating Excel spreadsheets full of log events, which a lot of people still do out there. We also offer, as Bob said, the teams together identity security posture assessment, which Bob kind of just went over, and we're happy to show you sampling of actual user activity and how we can affect positive outcomes there. We do compliance health check and remediation capabilities, which fits very well with this. So if you are FERC, enabled, if you're SOX, worried about attestation, if you're Gramm-Leach-Bliley, HIPAA, whatever your compliance issues we can show you also how to automate that process in this identity realm here. And obviously, people talk about zero trust and have been for the last 8 or 9 years. We actually really help you put together topology and plan how you can reduce privilege with the goal of getting to least privilege over the course of time, regardless of how large or widely spread all of your domains and things are. For some folks, we do security posture, also. So, identifying what the critical assets are in your SOC or in your organization, even on a global basis. From there, we're able to take those core assets and create security policy for you to help people, adhere to that. Part of that, by the way, and I'll talk about the AI corporate policy part, but part of that involves AI, because every AI company these days thinks they should just govern all the other AIs in an organization. We look at it very differently. We look at it as every AI needs to be tied to an identity. Every AI assistant somebody may be using that's not been officially provisioned, any other governance related tool that is touching real data comes into our corporate policy sort of analysis discussion. So that's the way, we've seen a lot of people and how they're kind of doing that today. And they're not doing it thinking about the compliance issues they must deal with. And also, they're not thinking about it from a privacy perspective. One example of that is we saw a, large law firm with folks using AI assistants gaining access to plaintiff and defendant information in similar applications, because as we know, when you plug in with your AI assistant, it just takes all the data it can possibly gain access to. So, that's a major conflict of interest. There are major challenges with the way people do governance for that today. And that's, we believe, is really going to keep evolving. The other thing that we are able to do is an attack surface review with complementary pen test. So that's kind of aside from our discussion today. But these are things, as Bob mentioned earlier, the security posture assessment is core to this. But we can also do any number of these with you to help you gain an understanding of, what the future can look like, and kind of bring that to reality. Some people are planning for their boards. They're planning for, strategic initiatives they have in the coming year or two. So, yeah, we can probably wrap to I think the last one here, and that's really about it. Don't want to paralyze everybody with PowerPoint here. Not sure if there are questions currently, but if so, I believe the chat is open, and we are happy to take your question.
If any questions, please be sure to put them in the Q&A section, and we'll be keeping our eyes open for that.
Okay. Yeah, I had been asked by a client earlier today what verticals that we work in, because obviously compliance is an issue and their workflows are different. I can tell you for IBM and for us, we work in healthcare providers, healthcare payers. We work with this technology and have been for a very long time. Financial services organizations, telecommunications companies, virtually, retail organizations, virtually most verticals you can think of, and everybody who's highly regulated, are big IBM fans that we work with, including the largest global credit card companies, and various others. So, are there any other questions, Courtney, as far as you can see? Nope, I guess not.
You guys did such a great job covering everything. I mean,
all right.
All right, cool. Well, once again, it's great to see everybody, and please reach out. We're here to help. And I've noticed a fascinating dynamic is that the first reaction we often get to this is almost fear, because everybody knows they have stuff, right? But it's having the guts to look at it is kind of the first step. And fortunately, as soon as you're willing to look, it's there. And so dealing with this stuff proactively is just obviously superior to waiting and taking 292 days to figure it out. And so we'd love to work with you on this stuff, and we'll talk soon.
All right. All right, Bob, thanks very much.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Jim.
Bob. Thanks, Jim. Everyone have a great day. We'll give you some time back.
Alrighty.